Today I want to talk about this Dutch farmer thing. A lot of people are talking about it, and a lot of my friends and people that I know are kind of reaching out to me, and they're kind of asking me, what do I think? And do I think, we should join the Dutch farmer resistance and all this? And I want to make a case about why I think it's a total waste of time, and you should preoccupy yourself with things that bring value to you. So first, a little introduction to me, and then I'll give some background on the subject, and then I'll make my case, and we'll wrap it up with a little cherry on top. So my context that I'm coming from is, I'm a farmer. I've been farming for well over 10 years, and though I don't commercially farm anymore, but I do live off the land. My wife and I and my 2 kids, we live off grid. And we're making the best of the situation that we're in right now with this whole New World Order rollout, this big move that's being played across the world that you'd have to be nearly blind not to see at this point. And so we don't need to get into that too much. On a philosophical level, I'm an anarchist, meaning I don't believe in the whole concept of the nation state. A lot of people have misconceptions about what anarchy actually means. Most people think it's Molotov cocktails and Antifa smashing things. And it's not. That's actually fascism. Those are brown shirts. Anarchy, the root of that word, means without rulers, not without rules. Most anarchists that I know who understand a lot of the principle philosophy that came from people like Murray Rothbard or Hayek or some of these early free market thinkers actually hold themselves in high regard to ethics and the idea of law and principles. So anarchy doesn't mean no rules, let's all just fight for each other and kill each other. That's not what it means at all. That's actually a psyop. That's actually one thing I've learned in my journey of understanding the law, and I've spent at least the last 10 years really researching the law. I've read hundreds of Canadian statutes. I've read international law, and I've learned a lot of things about it. One is that they use deception through words like systems like legalese to confuse you. You look at the word includes, and most people think includes means inclusive. Let's include everybody, but it actually means exclusive. It actually means excluding everything except the thing you're talking about. The word includes means that and only that. You can look up the legal maxim of that to find that out for yourself. But needless to say, I've done a lot of research on the law over the years, and I've learned that it's full of deception, but it's always actually there in plain sight. And things always come down to consent. They actually come down to free will, and the whole system works through trickery and tacit agreement. They get you to agree, but you didn't know what you were agreeing to. So anyways, I understand the law, and I get how it works, and I figured out a lot of remedy for myself. And it's great, because right now, I'm living free. I live in this nation state, de facto state called Canada, but I don't see any Canada here. And I have a lot of friends that reach out to me around the world, and they say, oh my God, Curtis, you're living in the total fascist, tyrannical state. And I'm going, where? I don't see it. Out here, there's none of that. And that's because, principally, cities are all the same. All these cities that are totally liberal or sort of Democrat run, they're all shitholes. And it doesn't matter what country you're in. It's the same thing. And you can find freedom anywhere. And I'll do another video about that another time. But back to where I'm coming on this is I'm coming at this from an anarchist perspective, in that I don't believe in the nation state at all. And that I don't want to open a can of worms with that, because that could lead to a whole other conversation, and maybe we'll save that for another time. Feel free to leave your comments or questions underneath the video here. But so, we're living off grid. We're We're on a solar powered, we got other forms of power up here too, but we're off grid, we're in the country. And there's freedom out here, but with that freedom comes a lot of responsibility and a lot of hard work. And yeah, so that's kind of where I'm coming from. So let me give you some background on the subject in question. So there's this whole thing with these Dutch farmers, right? And they're getting pinched by the government. And the government wants to restrict their nitrogen fertilizer, which is, in the big picture, a really stupid move. However, it's not for the government because the government has a plan here. And that plan all comes down to these 17 sustainability goals, World Economic Forum, UN Agenda 21 and Agenda for 2030, and all this globalist fascist takeover. And when you understand how this Dutch farmer thing fits into that, it all makes perfect sense, and it's exactly what they think they need to do. But in a nutshell, or pulling the lens back a little bit more from the Dutch farmers, just focus on agriculture for a second. Agriculture, just like every other sector, has been completely taken over by the state. And the reason the state does that is for control. You know, there's a great quote from Henry Kissinger about controlling the food. I forget it verbatim, but I'll put it on the screen here. And it's about controlling the food and controlling people. And the state knows this. So this is what they always do. And, you know, the Rockefellers and a lot of big government agencies and crown corporations, as we call them in Canada, have taken over a lot of industries, and agriculture has been one of the primary ones that they've gone after, because agriculture and farming or homesteading is what enables a lot of people to be free. And that's where I'm coming from, because that's the kind of situation that I'm living in. And so they want to dominate that sector. And just like any other sector, you know, finance, manufacturing, technology, transportation, energy, the government creates monopolies by protecting their protected class, and then they create regulations for everybody else. And so this has happened in agriculture, it's happened in every other sector. And, you know, from the Green Revolution that changed agriculture and moved everything towards petroleum-based fertilizers, synthetic chemical pesticides, whatever, they've taken over agriculture and they've made the entire sector incredibly dependent on centralized systems. And nitrogen fertilizers is just part of that. You know, here in Canada, we've got organizations called like the Grain Board, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Agricultural Land Reserve. These are all just communist scams to centralize authority under the guise of we're here to protect you, right? It's the biggest scam in the book. But that's what's happened to farmers. And so farmers have got to, in my opinion, take some responsibility with a lot of all this stuff going on, because you took the bait. And nothing's really going to change until people actually wake up to the fact that they have free choice and they have to give consent in order for the elite, the government, the institutions to have their way with you. And people gave up consent a long time ago. And farmers are sitting here angry now about the government restricting their nitrogen fertilizer, but they've become dependent on the government so that they don't even have free choice, because they're pigeonholed into a situation where they can't change anything because they're completely locked into one system. And that's how, you know, I've always said, you know, in my live streams, I haven't done any in a long time, and I will again in the fall and winter. But you know, the hands of the establishment, the New World Order, the Milner Group, if you read a book like Tragedy and Hope, that's what they refer to it as, is their hands are all over these things whenever you see centralization. Whenever you see an idea of a monoculture or a single idea proposed, that's how they do it. And that's how they lock you into these tricks. And so, in a nutshell, farmers have been pigeonholed and corralled. They've been farmed, essentially, into a central system that gives them no flexibility and no resilience. And so farmers are essentially completely dependent on whatever the government says. And so this whole Dutch farmer thing, in a nutshell, it's the same thing. These farmers have taken the programs, they've signed up for giving the government consent and jurisdiction over themselves, and now they're upset because the government wants to throttle things back. And it's just another bait and switch. And so that's, okay, before I go on, I'm just looking at some notes because I had some key points I wanted to hit here. So essentially, the farmers are completely dependent on the state. They're dependent on these centralized, if they're not dependent directly on the state, they're dependent on the centralized systems that are completely governed and regulated by the state. So they're essentially dependent on the state. And so now you're out here, these farmers are out here protesting as if that's going to do anything. And I hate to break it to you folks, but there's a bigger agenda at play here. And to think that you can protest and that's going to do anything, I think some more folks need to take the proverbial black pill, and that this isn't going to go well if you're going to sit there and ask the government for a handout or ask the government to change something as if that this whole rollout can just be voted away and a new government will come in. We can see that clearly elections are completely fraudulent and they do absolutely nothing. It doesn't matter who's in power. It's like an old saying, I forget who said it, but it's doesn't matter who you vote for, the government always gets in. And as long as people are going to give the government and the state validity, it's going to have more and more power over you. Because one thing I've learned over the years is, like I said it before, there is free will. And you have absolute free will, and you give that consent to authorities. And that's actually what validates them. The whole system, the whole world, the whole matrix that we live in is a big bullshit game where everybody has to convince somebody else of a particular story or narrative. And the more people that buy into that story or narrative, the more it validates that narrative, thus becomes our appeared reality. And that's exactly what's going on now. And that's why even you can listen to, some of these frontmen cronies like Klaus Schwab, who's insignificant really when it comes down to all this stuff. He'll probably be lined up to a wall and shot eventually. But he's a useful idiot to the system, and he's the front man of a lot of this. And he's saying, he was at this last World Economic Forum event talking about the new narrative.
So here, I think the next 2 days, we will look how we imagine, how we decide, how we execute the great narratives, how we define the story of our world for the future.
And why do they pay so much lip service to a narrative? It's because the narrative is what people buy into, and then they subscribe to that narrative, and then they give it power. And that's why I want to say that this whole idea of protesting whatever the government is doing is a complete waste of time. You think you're actually standing against them? You're actually validating them more, because you're standing there saying, they have power over me and I want them to change something for me. And they won't, because I don't need to get into what the agenda is. If you've stuck around for long enough in this video, you probably know what I'm talking about. But there's a big picture here, and it's not good for the common man. And it's not going to change until people actually create their own narrative, tell their own story, the more we pay attention to these, I call them wag the dog moments. The system is just putting out so much bullshit constantly to keep you in a perpetual state of reaction, where you're just one issue to the next issue. Oh, it's a trucker convoy. Oh, yeah, that's the new resistance. Okay, now it's the Dutch for. Oh, yeah, that's the new resistance. It's like, no. The resistance, the real resistance, is you taking responsibility for your life or your family or your community or perhaps your even extended community, whatever you can handle, and creating your own story. Because this is how it works. This is the game. You start telling your own story and stop paying attention and reacting to everything that they're throwing at you, things change. And that's what we're doing up here. We're telling our own story. I don't even care these days. I don't even listen to any of the truther stuff out there anymore, because it's just more wagging the dog. Yeah, you can criticize the mainstream media for fake news and propaganda, and they're certainly guilty of that, all of them. But in the truth community, there's a lot of bullshit as well. And it's continuously reacting to everything that the state is doing. And the more you're going to react, the more you're going to validate them. And I think there's probably the deepest psyop is in that. But we need to look at the state like a high school bully. So, you ever been in, some of us who were unfortunately brought up through the public school system, myself included, you've got the high school bully. And, for boys, it was the sort of the locker room situation where a lot of bullying happened. The best way to deal with a bully, there's kind of two things that happen when you want to deal with a bully, at least in my experience. And this worked throughout my life because I encountered bullies in high school where they'd kind of push you around. But then I also encountered bullies who are more the narcissistic type, that once you're in your professional career or once you're an adult, you encounter these narcissists who will try to manipulate you through gaslighting or antagonizing you or whatever. People experience these things in the common workplace, in the business world, you name it. And the best way to deal with a bully is to stand up and push back enough to assert your authority and then completely ignore them. So I actually had to deal with a narcissist not too long ago, and somebody that was working with me, and the dude is a total narcissist. I'm not going to go into it too much, but he was very manipulative, and I shut him down. I shut him down by standing up and then not even playing into his game. We need to do the same thing with the government. The government is nothing but a schoolyard bully. You need to stand up to them, and certainly learning some things about the law will help you. Push back a little bit, but don't waste your life fighting them. Stand up and then ignore them, because the more you give them power and authority, the more you actually validate their authority over you. The more you give them jurisdiction. We need to start telling our own stories, because this stuff that's going on right now is not going to change. It's not going to change until people start telling their own stories and creating their own realities. And that solution can come in many different ways. So the way that I'm doing it, and I'm not saying that this is the only way to do it, it's certainly not. There's probably an infinite number of ways you can find solutions for yourself, but the way I'm doing it is I fled the city. I'm no longer living in this liberal hellhole where social justice warriors can dictate the bylaws and codes of the city ordinances and control your life. Because it always comes down to kind of, at least when it comes down to government and control, a lot of it comes down to more people equals more regulation equals less freedom. So get out of the cities. Get out of the areas where there's lots of people. The country is amazing. And you can find freedom anywhere, in any nation state that you're in. You can find freedom. And in the case of Canada, if you look up at the definition of Canada in the Interpretations Act of Canada, it's defined as the internal and territorial waters. So where's that? That's not here. That's not here. I'm in free country here. This isn't Canada. And so you can find freedom in many different ways. Again, the way I've done it is I've got out of the city. I've got out of being surrounded by paranoid NPCs who are simply just reacting to whatever the mainstream media and government says of the day. Those people don't even exist in my world. So they're just not around here. We're off grid. We're trying to grow all of our own food. We're producing all of our own power. We have our own well. You know, we've got a place to live. We're building a new house. These aren't things that everybody can do, but you can do some of them. You can find some solutions. One thing I would say is get out of the city. Get out of a situation where you're reliant on centralized systems, anything relating to government, but centralized systems go far and beyond what people think is just government. You know, living in a city, you are completely dependent on the state because the state controls the local utilities. The state regulates everything that comes in and out of that city and all those big stores through different regulations and bylaws and codes and ordinances and all that. And anything that basically has you in a situation where they can flip one switch and you're done. And in a city, there's certain ways you can become more self-reliant in a city. There's no question about that. I've been showing that in my videos for a very long time. But for the most part, it comes down to a number of things like where's your food coming from? Where's your water coming from? Where's your power coming from? Where do you live? What are your neighbors like? How much space? What's the population density around you? What's the general culture of the area that you're in? There's a number of considerations. But you can change your own situation. And with this whole Dutch farmer thing, instead of protesting the government, which is just validating their power, get your farm off grid. Start using things that you can produce yourself. So you're upset about nitrogen fertilizer. Well, why are you using synthetic fertilizer in the first place that comes from a small handful of corporations from very few parts of the world? It's completely centralized. So, hey, I get the Dutch farmer thing as far as, you know, this whole squeezing of nitrogen fertilizers is really going to put a hamper on the food system. That's the point. So don't have any illusions about, oh, the government just doesn't know what they're doing. No. They know what they're doing. And the people in power who tell them what to do know exactly what they're doing. They're going to squeeze the food system. They're going to squeeze you into every possible way they can so that you comply with the next level of this New World Order rollout. It's the same thing they did with the injections. It's the same thing they've done with every other centralized system. It's the same thing with the climate change scam. It's the same old thing. It's just a new issue to bring in totalitarian control because they want it all, right? These people, they're not sitting there going, yeah, I've got my mansion, I've got my private yachts, I've got private estates all over the world. It's never enough because to the real people in power or perceived power, it's about control. It's about the thing that is scarce because they can print the money. You know, it makes you wonder why are there income taxes? why are there taxes at all when they can just print the money? Because it's a way to validate them. It's a way to keep you in a low frequency because every tax season, when people are filing their income taxes, it's a pretty demoralizing time, especially if you're an entrepreneur and you worked really hard for that money. Most nation states have progressive income tax, and so you work harder and harder and harder, and then you pay more and more and more taxes. And it's pretty demoralizing, and that's the point. It's to demoralize you. And it's to keep you in the lowest frequency as possible. And that's the way to stay in the matrix, is to get angry, is to constantly be reacting to everything that people are doing, or the government, or whatever the media is telling you. You're in a constant state of reaction. You're in a constant state of low frequency. You cannot ascend to the next level. Because ultimately, I think what's happening right now is there is a great awakening. And a lot of people around this plane of existence that we live in are waking up to the fact they took the red pill, and then they took the black pill, and they realized that the establishment status quo system doesn't have a good plan for you. And they're waking up to that, and the system doesn't want that. The system doesn't want you to wake up. It doesn't want you to realize what it is, because before you can really do anything about it, you first have to be honest with yourself and realize what we're dealing with. And, I'm not going to get too deep into the philosophy. This video will go on forever, but, a lot of this comes down to prophecy in Scripture. And it's all been written about. The story, and it's always about a story. Once you realize that it's all about a story, it's all about who believes a particular story, is the ending to the story is actually pretty good. But it involves you stepping up and taking responsibility. This is not going to be voted in. There's not going to be some politician that comes and saves the day. It's going to be about you telling your own story, taking control of your life. You can achieve freedom, but with that freedom comes a great responsibility and a lot of hard work. And the sad reality is most people don't want that, because it scares them to think about what they have to do and what they have to change in their lives, and how they have to kind of compromise everything that they've built their lives around to get to that. And I think that's daunting to most people. And I don't blame them, in the sense that, yeah, I get that. I struggled with that too before I was able to make some significant changes in my life, and none of it came easy. But that's kind of the reason we're still here. And I got to stop using these collective words like we're, because I don't consider myself in the same category. People say our government, or we need to change this. It's like, who's we? What are you talking about? What's we? Who's our? I'm not in that world. And that's kind of what's going to have to happen in order for people to get through what's coming from this New World Order takeover, is you're going to have to prepare for a complete war of attrition. The injection, they're going to roll that again. They're going to try a new whatever. I don't want to say too much of it, because I'd like this to stay up on YouTube for a little while. But this whole thing, this whole dog and pony show is going to continue, because it worked the first time. The amount of people that just lined up and rolled up their sleeves. I mean, I'm still shocked that anybody buys into it. But hey, you know what? People wake up at different times and don't have access to the same information. So we're all on our own journey. But it's amazing that it's got this far. And they're going to roll with that. And they're going to keep rolling climate change. And they're going to keep rolling new proxy wars and anything to keep you distracted and keep you reacting. Because if you're constantly just reacting to whatever the latest thing is, you can't build your own story. You can't create your own narrative. And that's fundamentally what you have to do. If you want to empower yourself, you need to accept reality and look for a solution for yourself, because everybody's solution is going to be a little bit different, and you have to put it all in the lens of your own context. I'm not sitting here up on this mountain showing all these great things that I'm doing to say, hey, you should do this exact same thing. Not at all. You do what suits you. Fundamentally, this comes down to your own power, and the more you start taking your power back, the more this whole thing changes, because it is free will. It all comes down to free will. The New World Order and all these cronies, they want to convince you that you're insignificant, that you're just this speck of dust floating in space, so that you don't realize that you're a child of God, that you're actually, you play a massive part in all of this. And there's a lot of responsibility in that we've actually, or other people have contributed to everything that's going on. You played a part because you went along with it. So you need to stop going along with it. and taking ownership of the situation and step up, because the more we step up, the more things are going to change, and they will in your own life. I mean, I can tell you that on my journey to understanding freedom, liberty, or even a higher spiritual calling, doors open up, things just change for you. And that's the change in my world. And you can experience the exact same thing by just doing it, by just stepping up. Stop reacting to all this stuff. In my opinion, and I don't mean any disrespect to friends of mine in the truth community, and I'm not going to name names, but I would suggest even stopping listening to any of it. Take action. Do things now. Who gives a shit what the latest thing is? Oh, did you hear what Justin Trudeau said? Oh, did you hear what Klaus Schwab said? Who cares? If you know the game, none of the little micro actions are going to matter anymore, because the game is to have a complete technocratic, totalitarian society where you're completely controlled all the time. It's a big farm. The system's a big farm. And coming from a farmer, I can tell you, I recognize agriculture when I see it. The whole game is a big farm, and we're being farmed. And the more you worry about the latest thing, and this comes from on the mainstream media side, and even in the truth community side, what difference does it make what the latest issue is? Get yourself resilient. Get yourself onto a higher frequency. Stop reacting to every little thing and start taking control of the things that you need in your life. So for me, that started with a mindset at first. Then it started with little things, because I started farming land I didn't own because I had no money. But I wanted to learn how to farm, and I wanted to learn how I could live off the land. And so take steps. Where's your food come from? Where's your power come from? How do you get yourself around? You know, the things that you need on a day-to-day basis, where do all these things come from? How can you centralize, or not centralize, but how do you localize and bring those things closer back to home? It's actually quite simple. Look at your life. And what do you need to live? We all need love. There's no question about that. But what do you need to live? And how can you change that? How can you get the things that you can't produce yourself? How can you get them closer to home, in that, okay, my neighbor can do this for me, or there's a guy in the community that can do this for me? Where do we get all these things? We're going to have to do this, folks, because this war of attrition that's already started is going to continue, and it's going to get more and more extreme. And so people who want to live free are going to have to take on more and more and more and more responsibility. And the reality of it is, in my opinion, is that's not going to come from all by yourself. You're going to have to connect with people and find other like-minded people that are taking action. And so, you know, in my life right now, I don't waste any time I've cut out everybody out of my life that's not bringing value. And, you know, I get around, I know a lot of people, and there's a lot of people who consider themselves activists, and they're fighting the system, and they're going to every rally. And unfortunately, when this war of attrition becomes more and more realized, these people are going to be left out to dry because they didn't put things into place to take care of themselves. And when things get really tough, like some of the stuff that's going on in the food system right now, and this nitrogen fertilizer scam is a big part of it, they're going to be showing up empty-handed. And when times get tough, people with empty hands aren't all that useful. So this trucker convoy thing is just, it's another wag the dog thing. Yeah, it sure looks cool to see all this resistance, right? It sure looks cool to see all these tractors dumping manure on politicians' doorsteps and blocking highways. Sure, it looks cool to see some resistance. But at the end of the day, what actually changed for them? Nothing. And instead of making their homesteads or their communities more resilient, they're standing out there validating the government even more. So don't get too distracted with all these little resistance movements, because they're not actually resisting anything. And I hate to break it to people, but the more you protest and the more you even talk about government, the more you validate it, the more you give it authority. It's time that people stood up. Push back that schoolyard bully and start ignoring him. Create your own reality. Manifest your own destiny now.